Hello, everyone. This is Greg for Knacks, and I'm here with Paul Saltzman, Canadian documentary filmmaker and photographer. You may know his films on the history of racism in the American South, such as 2009's Prom Night in Mississippi and 2012's The Last White Night. Or you may know his photography for The Beatles in India, which were published in a nice hardcover book earlier this year. And that's only a sample of a body of work that spans decades. But for our purposes, Saltzman is the creator and director of the World Culture and Youth series of documentaries, which looked at children from all around the world as they participated in the creation of items important to their cultures. These documentaries would later become the show Spread Your Wings, which aired on Nickelodeon in 1982. Paul, it's wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much, Greg.
How did World Culture and Youth come to be?
I was in Agra, India, where the Taj Mahal is. I was doing a 1-hour documentary on the Canadian ambassador to India, who was a remarkable human being. And we were standing there at a marble emporium. We had just been to the Taj Mahal, which is an incredible, 7 modern wonders of the world. It's quite stunning. And it's inlaid marble work with semi-precious stones, and it's considered one of the great art creations historically. And we were watching young boys, maybe 8 or 10 years old, and I was filming, doing inlaid marble work, which means carving marble and inlaying semi-precious stones. And I thought, wow, I come from a culture where if you don't have a university degree, you're not considered anything. And here are these kids with no education or little creating something of beauty. And it just opened my own eyes to creativity in the world in a different way, the passing down of creative traditions, like how did these young people learn this? The passing down of creative traditions from one generation to the next in different cultures, and how not only is that essential for people making a living many, many times, including in our culture, what's passed down from generation to generation in our culture. But not only is it important for that, it's important for creativity and for the sense of self of young people. So that led to doing 2 films that were sort of pilot films in the sense of television pilots, though I didn't know it at the time. One was on a young 14-year-old learning carpet weaving in Kashmir, India, and the other was a young 11-year-old boy learning inlaid gold and silver enamel work in Jaipur, and that led to doing 26 half hours around the world. And the kids were all mostly teenagers, and it was really celebrating their creativity, but also looking at the cultures and the passing down of traditions.
How did you select your subject matters over the years?
Oh, just what caught my attention, what interested me, what I could find by research. I went to New York and I talked to the American Crafts Council. I did reading. The internet wasn't the same. In fact, maybe it didn't exist. I'm not remembering 1975. There were no cell phones, of course, so communication was quite different. But for example, and often it was serendipity. So for example, I went to Cologne, Germany. I had arranged through phone calls to film a young boy who was a teenager. He was a composer and a concert pianist, and it had passed down from his father or grandfather. And when I got to Cologne with my mini crew, me and my sound person and my second camera person, so we shot with 2 cameras, even though we had only 3 people, so that was very efficient. And when we got to Cologne, he was gone. He had been called to some concert last minute, and there we were. So what do we do now? And I just did a bit of quick research and found that there was a violin making school in southern Germany in Mittenwald in the mountains that was world famous, and there were 1,000 kids on a waiting list, and they only took in 12 kids a year to learn violin making, cello making, the stringed instruments. And they said, sure, come on. So I drove from Cologne down to southern Germany and made a film about Steve, who was a 16-year-old violinist and learning to make violins. And so sometimes it was just serendipity, or it was always serendipity, I suppose.
How long was a typical production?
Well, we had almost no budget. So the first two films I made, I used, I just sort of scraped together $5,000 per film, which in 1975, when I did the first two, was, whatever, like 30,000 today, but it's still not much to travel to a foreign country, pay for hotels, airfares, and everything else, and pay the young person an honorarium, because I never didn't pay people, because it's important to me to so honor them. So normally speaking, I shot each one in 1 week for economic reasons. So, we would be in a country for, say, 2 weeks, take a few days to get there, get settled, meet the people. I would talk to the young person and their family. Really, what are your hopes? What are your dreams? How does this fit in with your family or cultural tradition? And then once I got the lay of the land, develop a storyline, a beginning, middle, and an end of something the young person themselves wanted to accomplish that we could actually see in a week or 7 days or 8 days of filming. And then we would wrap up and be gone in a day or 2 days afterwards. So usually it was a 2-week process for economic reasons. The longest actually was in Japan, where it took me a month to find the young person and film and leave. And there was a very interesting reason for that. One of the pieces of research I did in Japan, because I did research before getting there, but then on the ground, you always find out something's different, of course. And I met and had lunch with a professor at the university in Tokyo, I can't remember which university, whose expertise was creativity and creative traditions and the arts. And he said something really amazing. He said, you won't find very many young people learning traditional arts. They're dying out. It's tragic. They'll eventually die out. I said, how come? He said, well, there's such an emphasis on studies, and competition in marks and studies, that young people, when they finish school, they're doing tutoring and they're doing homework into the night and they're studying on weekends. So there's little to no time to actually take up some artistic, creative pastime. And then he said something else which really stuck with me. He said children used to take a few pieces of wood and knock together a toy. Now all the toys are bought plastic, and a child doesn't have to create toys. And he said, and children aren't using chopsticks as much. They use these things, I forget the word he used, where as a child it's both a fork and a spoon. I think it's called a spork or something like that. He said, so children aren't using chopsticks as much as they used to, and maybe that'll die out. And what happens then is you don't need the same manual dexterity to use a spork as you do using chopsticks. So children aren't gaining the same deftness with their hands that you would use in all forms of creativity. So that was pretty eye-opening and pretty mind-blowing to me. But eventually, I found a young woman who was part of a paper-making class, paper-making as in washi, W-A-S-H-I, the ancient tradition of painting with colored paper. And it's an exquisite art form, and she was learning from her high school paper-making club in a little village, a little farming village. But she also knew a master craftsman, one of the only ones left. And so that became that film. So that took a month just because it took time to find somebody.
Yeah, Yoshiko the Papermaker, I believe. That's one of the two films I've managed to see.
Yes, it's one of my favorites.
Did you have any mishaps while filming?
No, no injuries, no broken bones, no. But what the impact of what I did became much clearer to me much later. You know, I was celebrating in my own heart and in my work creativity and young people, and as I said, the passing down of these traditions, which are very important in the world. Um, and really, all families pass down traditions. They may be abusive traditions. They may be that families are torn apart by violence, and that gets passed down. But often it can be loving traditions of whatever. And so to me, celebrating that was very important to me. I spent 5 years doing these films, and I had to really find ways to economize and get places, and the budget was never enough. When I did the last one, I had a budget of $30,000 in 1980, but to go to China and make two films in China, which were the two last ones I did on $30,000 each, was like, you know, documentaries in foreign lands were being made for 70 or 80,000 or 100,000 at that time. But what I discovered was how positive the impact was on the young people themselves. Meaning, and this is so important in the world of child psychology now that we're much more aware of these types of things, meaning children, child psychology, human beings, how we feel, how we grow, how we are nurtured, how we take our place in societies as hopefully responsible, loving human beings. And part of that is having your beauty reflected to you. It's everything from the infant looking up and seeing a smiling face as opposed to a scowl, all the way through to, you know, you doing the show you're doing. And no doubt it feels good if somebody says, "Hey, Greg, that was terrific. Gee, thank you for doing that. That was, you know," and sometimes someone will say something like, "Gee, I saw your film and that was life-changing." Well, that's why I do what I do, honestly. There's better ways to make money than being an independent filmmaker, which, you know, you spend 90, or I do, 95% of my time looking for funding and 5% of my time doing the on-screen creative work. And so what happened was I first really had this strike home a number of years ago. I did one film in Florida on Amy Hobby. And Amy was a 13-year-old blonde Florida teenager, lovely young woman. And her father did hard edge photography as a hobby. And so she did hard edge photography as a hobby. She was learning it from her dad, and they would go around. And I didn't know what hard edge photography was, but it's basically taking photos of things you'd recognize, but when you see the photo, you don't recognize it. It's like using lines and shapes and shadows to create beautiful images. But the line and shape and shadow might be the underpass of a highway, but you wouldn't, unless you were looking for that kind of pattern or that kind of artistic visual, you wouldn't even notice it. So Amy, I did a film on Amy. You know, we filmed her at the Disney park, and we filmed her family, and we filmed her and her dad going around and doing this and all that. And years later, one of my dreams still is to find all those kids and make a follow-up film on each of them, you know, another 26 half hours or maybe 26 hours where you have the old footage of them in their youth and learning. And where are they now? Do they still do their creative art forms? Have they expanded their creativity? Have they passed it down to their children? And what's their culture like? What's Zanzibar like, you know, 40 years later? What's Florida like 40 years later? So I started to contact some of the kids. I didn't have any money. I've never done it because I haven't found the money to do it yet. this is where I say I buy lottery tickets, because if I win big, I'll never have to look for money again. I can just make the films I'd love to make. So, so far, Greg, that hasn't quite happened.
No. Crossing my fingers.
Yeah, we thank you. Well, we live in hope. That's our species, right?
Yeah.
So what happened was that among other people that I located and found out incredible after stories, I reached Amy Hobby, and it only took, 3 phone calls, a few days. You just start where you left off, and the trail somehow you find it. And so I talked to Amy Hobby on the phone, and I say, and she's now a 32 or 33-year-old young woman. It's 20 years later. And she says, "Oh, I'm coming to Toronto." I said, "Oh, it'd be great. How about we meet and for dinner? Well, allow me to buy you dinner." And she said, "That would be wonderful." And I said, "How come you're coming to Toronto?" She says, "Well, I have a film in the Toronto Film Festival with Ethan Hawke and a number of other well-known people." And I say, "Great." And we meet in a restaurant, and I'm walking towards this 32 or 33-year-old blonde woman who I remember as a 13-year-old, child adult, so to speak. And I put out my hand to shake hands, and she ignores my hand, and she goes right in and gives me a big hug. And I give her a big hug back. And that's kind of a wonderful moment, wonderful surprise. And we sit down, and after we order, I say, "How did you get into film?" Totally innocent, totally innocent. I say, "How did you get into film?" And she points at me, and she says, "You." So there's an example of honoring someone's creativity, and that inspired her to go into filmmaking, and she is an accomplished film producer and has done a whole bunch of very fine films, including a version of Hamlet on film. I forget if that was Ethan Hawke or not. So what I discovered, and I discovered it further on reaching other kids, is that by just reflecting their beauty, by just turning the camera on them and just making a film that says, you're cool, and what you do is important, and how do you feel, and what are your hopes, and what are your dreams, and let's film that. That what happened was that it really impacted every single one of the young people. Now, I haven't found them all, and one day, if I ever have the budget, it'll be part of the film documentary, how to find these people or going out to find them. But there's some stunning stories that are archetypical about the kids when I found out about them.
That's wonderful. So you worked on this project alongside with your then wife, Deepa Mehta. What was that collaboration like?
Terrible. It was a bad first marriage. You asked me, I'm giving you the truth. It was a lot of conflict, a lot of struggle, because I think neither of us were in the right marriage, and I think probably, well, I don't think, I'm sure Deepa would agree that it wasn't a good pairing. So it was very struggling.
What was your relationship with Cornet Films like?
They turned out to be a godsend. A man named Sheldon Sachs, who worked in New York, and I can't remember how we came across each other, how he found out about my work, but he saw the first 13 episodes. I did 26 half hours, and he said, "I love these. Are you doing more?" And I said, "No, I don't have the money to do more." And he brought Cornet to the table, and they put up a distribution guarantee, $400,000, which was a lot of money in that time. We're now talking, 1978, maybe. Meaning if I made the films and delivered them, they would give me $400,000 for the distribution rights to all 26 of them. 13 were already made. And that allowed me to go back to the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, who, after I did the first 2 on spec, I got some money from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, both English division and French division. So there were French versions of everything. And by the way, I didn't even think of it, but they haven't been seen in a long time, but they're now being streamed. They're coming online, being streamed as we speak, actually. And the way you find them, I believe, is you look up on YouTube there's a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, or it may be under CMF, the Canadian Media Fund. There's kind of its own little channel of archival films like this, and they're putting all 26 of them online. They're digitizing them, which is wonderful, and putting them online. So have you seen Steve's Violin, the one made in Germany?
No, the two I managed to track down was Yoshiko the Papermaker and Johannes the Silver Cross.
Right. Well, the Zanzibar film is one of my favorites. I mean, they all hold a dear spot in my heart for different reasons. The children, what we were filming, the teenagers, rather. They're not really children, teenagers. And so Steve's Violin, I just got a link this morning and saw it before you called, and I thought, wow, that's kind of very good. And he comes across as beautiful as he is, and he was a violinist, and his family tradition that was being passed down was learning the violin making. And it's a lovely film. So I'll send you the link when we're off the phone to that. There's two of them that I got a link for this morning from the people that are doing all this, but they'll all be up online before that long.
That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exciting because it gives a new life to it. The purpose of making them wasn't to make money. The purpose of making them was to really celebrate creativity. We're a stunning species, as you know. We're stunningly creative. We're stunningly loving. We're stunningly wonderful. We're also stunningly destructive. So I think it's important to celebrate the positive in what humans do, and in our own small way, each of us try and bring more love and more positivity into the planet.
I can definitely get behind that. At what point did World Culture and Youth go from just a film thing to a television thing?
Well, it was the other way around, actually. So my first funding was out of my own pocket and what I could scrape together. And then I sold those to CBC, Canadian Broadcasting. So they were on television first, then both English and French versions. And then when I finished the first 13, they started selling internationally to television. And when I finished the 26, they were then all of them. It's been seen in something like 100 countries on television. Where Cornet came along was in the middle of that process. As mentioned, I'd done 13, and they saw the potential of distributing them in the educational market and asked, is it okay if we change the title? Because the title was Spread Your Wings, about all of these people.
So Spread Your Wings was the original title?
Spread Your Wings was the original title.
Oh, I had that backwards. Yeah, I thought World Culture and Youth was the original title.
Right. Well, it was the other way around. And what Cornet did was they said, are you okay if we change the title? And I said, why? And they said, well, Spread Your Wings won't mean anything in the educational market, but in this period of time, so we're talking about the late 70s, 78, 77, they said there's a big emphasis in American education on learning about other cultures and other young people. So can we change the title to World Cultures and Youth? And I said, sure, if that's what gets it out there. And they actually did very well. So they guaranteed me $400,000. And I believe they sold around $2 million worth of 16 millimeter prints and later tape versions, which in those years, let's say the late 70s, the 80s, that was a huge whack of money to make on a documentary series. So they helped me finish the series, and they did very well by it.
Any other stories of production you'd like to share?
Sure. The Zanzibar film, I had been working on the first IMAX film. The first IMAX film was made in 1968 for the World's Fair in Japan, for the Fuji Group of Companies Pavilion. And it was IMAX was created by a Montreal company for people who had been connected to the National Film Board of Canada. And I had worked at the National Film Board of Canada in 1967, 68, and I got hired to be the second unit director, the production manager, and the researcher. So I had kind of three hats. But it was the job of a lifetime. I was 25 years old. I got to go to 14 countries. I worked 20 hours a day. I literally slept 4 hours a night, 7 days a week for about 10 months. But, you know, I was 25 and I could do that. And in the course of doing that, I was flying between Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. And the plane, a little puddle jumper, landed in Zanzibar. And Zanzibar, which is an island just off the east coast of Africa, and had been a sultanate, had been a Muslim colony from the Arabian Peninsula. And the sultan had been overthrown. And the island was in not revolution, but a change of system that was such that you weren't allowed to get off the plane. You know, passengers got off and passengers got on, but if you were on their way elsewhere, like I was, they weren't allowed to get off the plane. But it was a tiny little plane. And I got off and just stood at the bottom of the stairs to get some air. And a young boy who must have been 10 came over, and he was selling souvenirs to make money. And he was selling a little model dhow, a boat, an Arab dhow, which is the traditional single sail boat that plies the trade winds between Arabia, India, and the African coast. The traders would sail and bring and sell their wares and so on. And I bought this little Arab dhow, this beautiful little, maybe 1 foot long model boat. And I took it home. And when I started doing Spread Your Wings, I thought, I wonder about making a film about a young person learning how to make an Arab dhow. So I got on the phone and I went to the library, and I found out that Arab dhows were made on the coast of Kenya and Tanzania. But I couldn't find any new information, except there was a little thin book by a dentist in, where was he based? He was based not in Zanzibar, he was based in Mombasa on the coast, just opposite Zanzibar on the Kenyan coast. And I found a little book in the library on Arab dhows and dhow making by Dr. Jewell. I still remember the name. You know, you forget lots of stuff, but Dr. Jewell, and a book on dhow making. So I called Dr. Jewell, right? You do research, find a way to get to people. So I called Dr. Jewell, and I speak to him on the phone, and he says, yes, but it's a dying skill. There's very few still being made. He said there's no big ones being made. You know, they used to be 40, 60 feet long and carry cargo between those Arabian Sea locations. He said they're not building any big ones anymore, but you might find a few little fishing boats being built, maybe, 14, 16 feet long. And they'd be built on either the Kenyan coast, maybe Zanzibar, but he didn't think so. So I flew with my closest friend, Fred Harris. We flew to Nairobi, and I said, you go to the Kenyan coast, I'll go to the Tanzanian coast, and we'll meet back here in like 3 days. So he went looking, and I went looking, literally asking people, do you know if anyone's making Arab dhows? And we were told that there was a little village at the north end of Zanzibar called Ras Nungwi. And they used to make dhows there, and they used to make big ones. But even the tourism ministry in Zanzibar town where I went didn't think they were being made anymore. So by that time, there were 3 of us, Fred and myself and my sound person arrived. And so we hired a car, and I asked the driver to take us to Ras Nungwi. And we didn't know whether we'd find any Arab dhows being made at all, but we were on this hunt. And the driver takes us to Ras Nungwi and stops the car, and then there's sand. You can't drive on the sand, and the beach is probably a quarter of a mile ahead of us, and we're walking along the sand in between huts where fishing people were living, the fishermen's huts and fishing families. And then there's a line of palm trees at the edge of the beach, and then there's sand and the ocean. And as we come through the palm trees, what do we see? We see three big Arab dhows being built. It was like a dream. It was like phenomenal. There were two 40-footers and one 60-footer being built, and it was like, holy mackerel. Not even the government 30 minutes away knew that this was going on because, they know what they know, right? So I made a film on Arab dhow building, and it's one of my absolute favorites. And, they're all favorites in the sense they all have something beautiful and something important, but that's one of my sort of main favorites.
Right. Now, in that film, I believe I might be mispronouncing this, Slima the Dhow Maker.
Right.
What was it?
Slima the Dhow Maker.
Slima the Dhow Maker. I read an anecdote somewhere that the production actually helped fund the boat making.
Yes. What happened was that the big boat, which of course I was attracted to because of visually, right? Visually, the big boat had greater visual impact, and when they would launch it, it would have a greater visual and auditory impact as a scene. But the man who was building the boat, the owner, had run out of money. Now, I didn't have much money, as I said, but I negotiated that I would pay, and I can't remember how much it was, $500, something that we would think is modest, but was a lot of money when you're paying for local labor. And so I was able to negotiate with him that he would finish building the boat and get it in the water while we were there. And that took about 2 weeks. So we were in East Africa for a month. That was one of the longer shoots. And the climax, the ultimate scene at the end, is Slima, our young boy who's been learning dhow making, is part of the whole village launching the boat, and the drums are drumming and the singers are singing, and they're dragging this heavy 60-foot hull. The mast wasn't on it yet. They do that when they're in the water already, but they're pulling it across. They put logs down and they pull the boat over the logs, and then they take the logs out from under the back and put it under the front so you can go another 10 feet. It's really a wonderful process of, everything, human creativity, transportation, trade. It's very, very important what they were doing for the life of the village and the life of those people served by these trade routes. So that's the climax of the film.
That's great. Hopefully I'll be able to get to see it.
Oh, no doubt. We can arrange that, and I'll send you links as I get them.
That sounds great. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time. Since I've got you, is there anything you'd like to promote?
No, just, people seeing Spread Your Wings would be, really wonderful. And the difference between Spread Your Wings, by the way, in World Cultures and Youth was really nothing, just a change of the title. So, right. So that if you're seeing the ones on television, that's the ones that were distributed in the educational market. So that would be wonderful if people just got turned on to it after all these years. And thank you, Greg, for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you for making some really excellent films.
Thank you very kindly.